Good afternoon. Now is the time. I'm going to get this together. Good afternoon. The time is now 3 p.m. We will go ahead and call to order the November regular meeting of the Cobb County Board of Elections, again calling it to order at 3 p.m. I invite all of those that are willing and able to rise with me to recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All members of the board should have the proposed agenda before you. Has everyone had an opportunity to review it? And if so, are there any proposed revisions or modifications? Yes, Mr. Bruning.
I have not gotten the October 14th minutes or the November 5th minutes. So I think we should table those until the next meeting when we can have a copy in front of us.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And I do note that I believe we previously had tabled the September 30th meeting minutes as well. That being the case, is there a motion that you'd like to make, Mr. Bruning?
I'd like to move that we table the September 30th, October 14th, and November 5th minutes, approval of the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. It's been moved and properly seconded to table outstanding meeting minutes for the following dates: September the 30th, October the 14th, and November the 5th. Unless there's any discussion, I presume there wouldn't be. I will go ahead and call for the vote. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? The motion passes such that the agenda is modified to remove the approval of the meeting minutes. With that, I'll take a motion to accept the agenda as modified.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. It's been moved and properly seconded to approve the modified agenda. Again, that's with the modification of removing the approval of the meeting minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, that would be public comment. I believe we have 7 individuals that have signed up for public comment. I'll ask that you step to the podium. We will start off with Liz Marchiani.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm Liz Marchioni from Marietta. I just wanted to thank you all. I saw many of you throughout the election process, spending lots of time and hard work for hours and hours and hours upon hours. Each of you board members, thank you for your service. I really appreciate it. That's the good note. On the questionable note, I was in a hearing on a Friday before Election Day where everyone was discussing the 3,000 plus absentee ballots that were coming in and whether they should accept them, not accept them, push them down the road, whatnot. And one of the attorneys had mentioned for the county that, hey, you know, we had printers that weren't working. We had printing machines that were not working. So my question is, and I'd like a little more detail on that since, you know, it's important, election integrity and understanding our elections is important. We're a big county, we should be on top of this. What was the deal with that? If somebody could explain that, that would be great. Why weren't we ready? This was touted as the biggest election of all time, the more voters than ever. But Cobb County wasn't ready. We didn't have machines working. What's that about? So I'd like answers to that if somebody could provide that. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of your service. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marchioni. And I neglected to mention everyone will be allotted the 5-minute time frame for providing your remarks. Moving on to the next person on the list, Elizabeth Hendrickson.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the members of the board as well as the entire election staff. Every person who worked in this building that I encountered could not have been more polite, professional, and helpful. Despite the stressful circumstances, the changing rules and circumstances, I was involved everywhere from poll watching to ballot monitoring, serving on vote review panels and ballot duplication panels, and being present for the absentee ballot processing and write-in tallies. I encountered so many people, from ones I see here to many, many others. Everybody was as transparent and patient with questions as they could be, despite the lengthy shifts they had been working for months and weeks and weeks. It was clear this attitude starts with Ms. Ball and goes through the whole department. Despite her packed schedule, I experienced and witnessed her personally helping and serving individual voters, as well as facilitating the process in general. I've also observed members of this board facilitating voters dropping off absentee ballots, and have heard about their assistance in some other practical aspects of the process as well. Thank you to all of you who were involved in making this election as smooth, secure, and accessible as possible. And I hope that gets conveyed to all the people I didn't meet, don't know, and who are not in here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Hendrickson. Next up is Mr. Leroy Emkin.
Well, I'm not gonna not follow with a compliment to all of you on the work that you did. There's no question about that. And I also want to recognize the sheriff's office for the patience that they had and the time they spent. And also thank you for 5 minutes. I just came from a board of commissioners meeting, and all I had was 3 minutes to do what I'm about to do now. So I'm going to use that extra time to provide some criticism. But first, let me read something. I gave this presentation a year ago at the Board of Commissioners, and I'm going to do it today at the Board of Elections. My comments will be in connection with citizens' First Amendment rights to criticize our local, state, and federal government during periods of public comment as described by the following 2 court cases. First, New York Times Company versus Sullivan, United States Supreme Court. The subject was the First Amendment principles during periods of public comment, which we are in right now. Perhaps the most fundamental of all First Amendment free speech principles is that individuals have a free speech right to criticize the government. In the New York Times versus Sullivan case, United States Supreme Court Justice William Brennan famously wrote of a, quote, profound national commitment to the principle that debate on public issues should be uninhibited, robust, wide open, and that it may well include vehement, caustic, and sometimes unpleasantly sharp attack on government and public officials. I interpret that as verbal attacks, not physical. Unquote. Second, the Mama Bears lawsuit filed in the United States District Court of the Northern District of Georgia. A parental rights group in Forsyth County called the Mama Bears won a federal First Amendment rights lawsuit against the Forsyth County School District, included in the court order, senior United States District Judge Richard Story ordered the following, quote, the court also permanently enjoins the district, its officers, school board members, agents, servants, employees, and all persons in active concert or participation with them from enforcing the respectfulness requirement. I'll repeat that. Enjoining them from enforcing the respectfulness requirement. The restriction on personally addressing board members. I know some of your names, Debbie, Steve, Tori, Stacy, Jennifer. including the superintendent, or any restriction on profane, uncivil, or abusive remarks contained in the Forsyth County Schools current public participation policy, or any substantially comparable provision in a future such policy, unquote. And that, quote, this injunction is binding on the district, the Board of Education, their successors, agents, attorneys, and assigns, and all those active in concert or participation with them, unquote. This order was signed by Judge Story on January 31st, 2023. Well, I'd like to make a comment that may sound abusive to some, but in my opinion, anybody unwilling during the Pledge of Allegiance, unwilling to stand and face the flag, to me, is complete disrespect for this country, for those who have given their lives to defend our freedoms, our Constitution. This is unacceptable. And anyone in this room, especially those on the board, who continue to disrespect the flag and disrespect those who provide a service to our country. We just had Veterans Day on Monday, celebrating not only those veterans who are currently alive, but all those who gave their lives in defense of freedom for us. Not to respect the flag, not to state the Pledge of Allegiance, Jennifer.
Mr. Imkin, that's your time, sir.
Thank you.
It's your 5 minutes.
You gave me a chance to say what I wanted to say.
Understood.
I'm looking at you.
Ms. Rossman?
I saw you in my eye.
Christine Rosman, and I'm actually, a friend sent this to me today, Ted Metz, and I'm reading on his behalf. I think you all got an email from him, the board got an email. Act now to send this, okay, so both the Georgia Supreme Court and Georgia's Northern District U.S. Court have affirmed the current force and effect of OCGA 21-2-437. This law prescribes the clear and long-standing procedures of state law for the court and return of votes by paper ballot at polling locations since 1863. Our elections with optical scanning systems in Georgia are subject to statutory provisions governing use of paper ballots. That's Rome versus Athens, Clark County Board of Elections back in 2020. Despite the judicial theater over rules in the state court, state law is what is prescribed by the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, voting clause. By law, your poll officers must count the ballots by hand, count the votes through the caller tallier method, create ink tally sheets, and have all poll officers duly certify on return sheets prescribed by the Georgia SOS. By law, voters must fold their ballots before leaving their voting compartment per OCGA 21-2-435. D, to maintain constitutional secrecy, which you prohibit. It appears you failed to heed the warning before November 5th. There's a URL to look at. These election documents are not optional. They are mandatory and whatever that word is, whatever, okay.
Requisite.
Yeah, that one, thanks. To county certification action necessary to make elector votes effective under 52 USC 10101. At this time, you have nothing to certify, as the system result tapes produced at the constitutional place of election are not certifiable. State law does not allow you to usurp your thousands of sworn poll officers with tabulations center electronic systems feed. What is lawful? OCGA 21-2-437 A and B prescribe the mandatory requisite, accounting steps for poll officers to duly certify and for the county superintendent to proceed to county tabulation per OCGA A 21-2-420, A and B. These simple procedures entrenched in our common law of 1863 include plain human methods such as poll officers reading aloud, handling of ballots, and carefully entering each vote in ink. Have you ever heard the system read aloud? State law does not prescribe that an electronic system be leveraged within your jurisdiction to replace our lawful election procedures and thereby violate our Georgia Bill of Rights. Georgia's highest court in Rome dictates that the system is an adjunct, assist, and not a substitute. Certificates require duly certified return sheets signed by all poll officers constitute certificates essential for county action pursuant of OCGGA 21-2-493B. Without these certificates, your county election officials cannot duly certify without violating the Georgia Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, and failing to uphold Article 9 home rule provisions. Federal violations in failing to conduct elections by paper ballot provisions of law prescribed by the Georgia General Assembly 2 USC 9 is also violated, which states that all votes received or recorded contrary to this section shall be of no effect. This federal statute prescribes the manner for election of U.S. representatives. Georgians must vote by prescribed paper ballot to elect our U.S. representatives. It is also not optional. It didn't happen on November 5th. Oversight failure in these areas represents blatantly negligent government. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rossman. I will note at the beginning of your comments, you made reference to an email that Mr. Metz advised you that he shared with us. I have no record of that email. He did send a document to our offices last Friday, but I have no record of that email. I don't know if my colleagues do.
Okay.
Just wanting to get that on the record.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Next up, Ms. Grubbs.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to say, first of all, to you guys, good job. You're always so pleasant, you're always so hardworking, and you're just really a joy to be around, honestly. You don't look too happy right now, but I think that's how you always are. But you're always a joy to be around, and, I look at everybody who's involved in the process, like when we were here, on advanced, return date and taking all that in. We're all friends and neighbors. I mean, if we would see a familiar face, we'd say hello at the grocery store and that kind of thing. We probably have kids that got to the same schools and things like that. So it really grieves me when things get contentious. It really, really does. And let me say, again, my name's Sally Grubbs. I'm the chair of the Cobb Republican Party, but a lot of people would assume that, Trump won, yay, we're done with election integrity, and that's not how I feel at all. Because we have down ballot races that are very much a concern, and to be honest with you, this board, along with every other board in the state of Georgia, is saddled with an albatross of a voting system that is perpetuated by Brad Raffensperger in his office, and you have no choice but to deal with the things that were dealt with from the Secretary of State's office, but there are things you can do. I truly believe that our elections process is nonpartisan and should inure to the benefit of all legal voters in our city, county, state, and nation. The voting process should not be politicized. However, that is where we find ourselves many, many times. I'm thankful for all of those who work in elections and that where they are trained to do their jobs well and efficiently. I mean, if coming in just to work provisional, everybody, it's so orderly and nicely set up. And everything progresses seemingly smoothly until you find that tabulator that doesn't have, have the memory cards for it, and you have to run out and, deal with emergency things that happen because it is a system that has opportunities for improvement. I will say, unfortunately, this board did fall prey to the mainstream media's narrative, and this county approved and spent money on ridiculous bad items that further fell into the media's narrative of violence, which was perpetuated by the elections office. It should be noted that the threats were not even really taken seriously, as evidenced during the returns of AIP equipment and ballots. We didn't have a sheriff here at the time, so there wasn't that big of a concern. It should be duly noted that many of the items addressed up front by board member Debbie Fisher were validated during the elections process. The refusal to address voter roll challenges, citing one incorrectly, as well as election processes, further evidences that our voter rolls are not clean. There is the problem with Garvis and e-polls not syncing. I cannot tell you how many calls that I received from people that voted and they didn't get voter credit for days and days and days. There was the opportunity, and it's not like I wanted to go out to the media and say, people aren't getting credit. Hey, you can go try and vote again. We don't want that to happen, but that is a legitimate concern that could have happened had people known that and realized that. I hope now that this election is over, that you will seriously consider the proper process for voter roll challenges, that we do have clean voter rolls. Also, there's a lot of processes that, despite getting guidance from the Secretary of State, that you can clean up yourself. And I want to be part of a solution, not part of a problem. Per my email sent earlier, I find that the absentee by mail, UOCAVA, FWAB ballots, that is a problem. So there are a lot of successes, but there are a lot of opportunities for improvement in process. And I hope that we can come together and work on those things together, because there are some very significant issues, and we have a District 2 Commission election coming up, and we're gonna be doing all of this again. So y'all are ready, right? So I hope that we can work together in a spirit of unity. There is some tension and sometimes vitriol when it comes to observers. It should be a transparent and open process to the public. And I think there were some games played there that are unfortunate, and I hope that doesn't happen again in the future. But to the board and to Tate and to you guys, thank you, because I know you're not getting rich on doing what you're doing. You do it because you believe in the process and what you're doing. I will note my friend from Mississippi who came was astounded at how complicated our process is. So whatever we can do to make that more simple is great.
Thank you, Ms. Grubbs. And just as further update, Ms. Rossman, I have now received, or we've all now received the email. It was sent to an incorrect email address for the 5 of us. So that's why it wasn't received, but it's now been forwarded to us. Joanne Wood, Ms. Wood.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I spoke to you earlier in the election process during a very fraught and unpleasant phase of pre-election furor, all of which was unnecessary and filled me with dismay. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you again after a fair and well-run election process to express my thanks for your hard work. As I mentioned the last time I was here, I taught elementary school in Cobb County for many decades, and part of my curriculum was to teach about the election process and how important voting was. Never did I expect to see the day when some embittered partisans attempted to derail and control the voting process in ways that were at best rude and at worst unpatriotic. And by the way, speaking of patriotism, as a Georgia teacher and a social studies supervisor, I'm well aware that no one can be compelled to recite any oath or pledge, and that does not diminish their citizenship. I had to be aware of that as a teacher in a classroom each day when the pledge was given. We cannot command our students to recite against their beliefs or their will. I'm here to thank this board for its leadership and perseverance in the face of the unrelenting pressure you have faced. You have stayed the course and fulfilled your duty, and you have the wholehearted support and thanks from most, if not all, of Cobb's voters. In my classroom, I often have my students learn the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. Now, Rudyard Kipling has his problems, But this poem captured a great deal of wisdom and character lessons that I think we could all use reminders of during these troubled times. I'm thinking specifically of this part of the longer poem, and I quote, "If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. I want to thank you for keeping your integrity and preserving our election process despite all the vitriol that has been hurled at you. You have been a real inspiration to me. I wish that each one of my former students could see the example you are, and they would know that our voters are in good hands. Thank you for all you have done and continue to do to preserve our democracy." Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. And finally, Mr. Mike Benz.
Thank you to the board and to the election workers and such a long and difficult process. And there were so many people who worked on this, which led by our director, Teddy Fall, and just lots of volunteers. I was asked to recognize that just from the Democratic Party standpoint, I'm sure we could probably double this and consider what our counterparts in the Republican Party. So from our standpoint, we were asked to fill 142 volunteer time slots for things such as vote review ballot panels and duplication panels, right? And asked to provide basically 523 hours of volunteer work. This was provided over a period of 18 days. And there were 44 volunteers who provided this work. So I'm sure with our counterparts, you can probably say times 2 or times 2.5 or whatever it is, right? So just grateful that we have such an active participation of just regular folks who want to participate in the process. Also with the poll workers, had worked very collegially with poll workers, the Republican, in more than one poll setting, and I can say that every poll setting that I was in, everything ran smoothly. I think there were problems with the knowing and the communications between the poll pads, and what do you do when things like that, you don't have any control over that, and in that case, you do exactly what the podium says, you keep your head even when others do not. And thanks to Director Fall for doing that, providing the leadership and the calm support. This was thank the board for, again, this was a steady, honest leadership. There was fair handling of everything that came up prior to the election. I know that wasn't to everyone's satisfaction, but the timetable and such, you did what you could do, and you really went out of your way to listen to any opposing ideas and to honor those and to give people their chance to speak, no matter how vitriolic it was, since that's their First Amendment right, I say. Again, temporary office workers, poll workers who took time to their lives for the training, their flexibility to fill in where and wherever they were needed. Again, it was, I found it to be a very collegial sort of process. A lot of sitting and watching the paint dry in many cases. So there was nothing terribly exciting going on when it came to being a volunteer that I was able to discern anyway. And again, thanks to the board for backing Director Fall when these problems came up with the poll pad and the knowing, for pushing back and pushing the Secretary of State to have the vendor try to correct these problems, and then shove that down on our staff, and perhaps then have to have more volunteers or someone to try to spend hours trying to straighten out a problem that was really the vendor's responsibility. So again, thank you. This election, like previous elections, was conducted with integrity. Thank you for, I think, earning our confidence in you, a free, fair, honest election, and faith in the rule of law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Benz. That concludes public comment. We'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is new business, starting with our director's election report.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. We have quite a bit of information to get through, but I'll do my best to make sure we cover and answer as many questions as we can. Here's kind of the layout. So we'll go through pre-election day with ABM and AIP, election day, and the precinct issues we saw. We'll talk about post-election day. That's when we'll look at the official and complete results, which is, they'll become official when you vote on them, but that's what you have in front of you. And then if you want to go ahead and vote on it at that time, you can, or wait to the end. I also was going to talk about the RLA, and then we'll talk about later in the agenda, the next year's schedule and the AIP proposal for the special election. So in looking at an overview, one thing I think, since I was able to sleep this weekend, which I'm very grateful for, I really had some time to think before coming into this meeting with the holiday and think about really holistically what we did. And y'all know I use a lot of sports analogies because that's how I think, and a lot of football analogies. And I think one thing that's really hot right now, you hear football coaches talk about is the 3 phases, right? And they're talking about offense, defense, special teams, but I think that that really applies to what we do here. So as a program, as an office, we have 3 phases. We have AIP, ABM, and election day. And I think overwhelmingly, 2 of those phases were extremely successful, right? AIP and ABM went off without a hitch, other than a few poll pad issues, very few complaints, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so those 2 phases where the majority of our votes were cast were extremely successful in their jobs and carrying out their job. And we had 1 phase, as we've heard about and we'll talk about at length, fumbled the ball, right? And we made mistakes in that phase that led us to where we had to overnight 3,400 ballots. And I don't want to diminish that mistake at all. And we're going to talk about it and we'll continue to talk about it. And I don't want to take away from that, because we know as people who work in elections that we do this because we want every single vote to count. It's not like, oh, that's just 100 votes. It doesn't matter, right? That's not who we are. We want every single vote to count. And so I don't want to diminish that, but I do want to make sure that when we're looking holistically, that we were really successful in the majority of what we did in this election. And I don't want to take away from the other phases when we start talking about ABM specifically. So that's just kind of how I was hoping to set in my mindset of football before we jump in. So as far as AIP, we got a ton of compliments. I tried to forward the ones I could to y'all that were in email or voicemail. I got a lot of handwritten notes, a lot of thank you notes, talking about how pleasant everyone at AIP was, how great of an experience they had. And it wasn't just one site, it was across all of our sites. So that was really great to hear. Overall, we had, in my thought, very few complaints across AIP and election day from observers. Most of them were really just due to miscommunication, either from us to the manager or between the observer and the manager. And all of them were handled right away with the phone call, whether it was AIP or election day. And all of them, to my knowledge, were resolved. I didn't get any follow-up saying this is still going on, or the next day AIP, they're having the same issue. And so that was really great to see our partnership with the parties when they had issues with their observers and things they were seeing. We were able to rectify them right away. All AIP equipment issues were really related to the poll pads, as we talked about on Friday, and we'll talk about more. Election day issues were more centered around paper jams with the scanners, mainly due to the write-in trays being full. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to election day. But overall, it really was few calls. We weren't frantically sending really just a few controlled issues that we were able to easily fix, which I'll talk about when we get to election day. When we talk about absentee by mail, one thing that was really successful was the use of Fort Orange Press, the use of our third-party vendor. So we mailed out the vast majority of our ballots through Fort Orange Press, and it was really successful. We had tracking numbers on all of them. So as voters called in, we were able to look up and see when they were scanned in, where they were scanned in. And I think that that really helped us assist the voters when they were waiting on their ballots, or when they were waiting on their ballots to be returned to us. So we issued, and we'll look at the ABM numbers as well, 33,105 ballots. So those 3,400, what we've called the affected ballots, is about 10% of the total number of ballots that we issued. So the other 90% were issued on time, well, and we didn't have mass reported issues of, like we had in previous elections. We had complaints, of course, of people saying they didn't get their ballot, but overall it was much less on a scale than what we saw previously this year. Okay, so as we look at pre-election day, I'm going to give an overview of some AIP numbers first, just to get the chunk of the numbers out of the way, and then we'll dive into how we tie all the numbers together. So this is kind of a breakdown. Oh, it kind of cut off. I apologize. This doesn't like my text box, but this is kind of a breakdown of the different sites that we saw. So we had a total of 293,617 voters vote in AIP. Our busiest site was Northeast, that's Tim D. Lee. They did 40,508 total voters. Second was Southeast, which is Smyrna. They did 37,380 voters. Third was East Cobb Government Center did 33,898. Fourth was Kennesaw at Ben Robertson. They did 26,900. And then fifth was our office here. We did 25,116. Or if you combine us with the elderly and disabled side of the house, that's 34,036. So overall, we saw a lot of voters. This next graph kind of gives you an overview of how we compare to 2020 and 2022. So the orange line, that baseline is 2020. The green line is the last gubernatorial 2022. And then the blue line was this election. So obviously we did an extreme amount of volume this election compared to previous years in AIP. But for the most part, the trend lines between 2022 and this year were really similar, which is really helpful with us when we think about planning for large elections. So to see similar turnout for the most part across the sites, just at a larger scale, is really helpful for us when we plan forward. So you can see Tim Lee did almost double what they did in 2020, and they were our busiest site. So I think that now we're starting to see the post-COVID trends kind of fall off, and I'm sure that we'll see 2026 in a similar pattern as 2022 and this year, and that'll help us plan and make sure that we're allocating our resources where they should be. So this next one is just a sampling of days. So I like to provide this to kind of show a snapshot of what we did. So I always like to look at the first and the last day. So we had a stellar first day at 21,657, and we pretty much averaged about 20,000 voters that entire first week, which was great. Then we leveled off to around 15 to 16,000 voters the second and third week. Except for that last day, we always had that big bump. That last day we did 22,011. We did almost exact same numbers on Sundays, which again is great to see that consistency to help us plan. Similar numbers, both Saturdays, 14,000 to 12,000. But overall, I think that we really saw consistency, which helps us understand how our voters will vote in the future. Okay, so now we're going to kind of pick up our conversation from Friday on adjudicating all the numbers and making sure all the numbers tie together. So first, an update we received late last night, early this morning from Knowing that based on the voters that we were able to find that they weren't able to find, mixed with our daily recap sheets that the sites did, they were able to share a spreadsheet with us that had a bunch of timestamps on it where they believed that there was a check-in, but that there wasn't a check-in saved. So that's all they were able to provide. So it was a list of, I think it was 813 timestamps. We've started going through those. Some of them have been successful in that we found corresponding voter certificates of people who didn't have credit, and we're able to go ahead and start assigning that credit to them. Others are false positives, which Knowing said that they believed could happen. And so we're working through that. Luckily, Director Evans from the Secretary of State's office sent a buzz post out on Friday. I'm not sure if y'all saw it, but he clarified that there's an SEB rule that requires after certification within 30 days, the reconciliation report, but OCGA 21-2-215 provides 60 days for county election officials to ensure all credit for voting is in the voter registration system. So as we work through this timestamp spreadsheet that Noe sent us and we find corresponding voter certificates, we're able to go in and tie in those voter credits to people who should already have it. So that's where we're at with knowing. I believe that that's likely the extent of their resolution. I don't think that they're able to provide us more information than that. And so that's kind of where we stand with what they were able to provide and how we're going to use that to assign voter credit.
If I might,
Mhm.
what is your preference with respect to questions that we might have? Perhaps we go through your presentation and then we ask questions, or
I think
is it most efficient and effective to ask questions during, at the conclusion of you're making a presentation on a particular topic?
we can answer questions before I jump in. I had a note for the next 5 slides. I just need to get through all of those together
Understood.
and then we can ask questions. Other than that, I'm fine taking them as you guys have them.
I assume we're fine with that.
Okay, so before I jump into those, so one thing I wanted to make sure kind of level set is that when it comes to elections, the numbers never match exactly, right? It's almost impossible to have the numbers match exactly. We should have really similar numbers between Jarvis and ePolls, right? And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Those should be very close. They're never going to be perfect because Jarvis has imperfections, and as does ePolls. But those numbers don't usually match the number of ballots cast, right? Normally, in a normal election, as we will at the end when we're able to adjudicate all our numbers, we will have more check-ins than we have ballots cast because there are always ballots that walk out the door. We know that that's a known thing. Either people do it because they don't know better or they do it intentionally. I know there was one day of AIP at one site, I don't remember what site it was, the person who was working the door caught 5 people trying to leave with their ballot. So that was great. We had the staff to catch that, but it's a known issue in elections. Anytime you have paper-based voting, people are going to leave with their ballot either accidentally or on purpose. So in a normal election, you're going to have more check-ins than you would have ballots cast. So even then, the odds of you tying out are almost none. I don't think that any county would really have that ability unless they're very small. So with that being said, I'm going to go through the next 5 slides to try to look through these numbers. And then when I get to the end of those 5, we can talk through it because it's going to be a lot of numbers and a lot of information. And I think to see the whole picture is what would be most helpful. Okay, so as we look over the next few slides, we're going to be looking at tying Jarvis, the Jarvis numbered list, to the number of ballots cast, and then the number of ballots cast to the check-ins and ePolls, right? We want to bridge all 3 of those numbers together. So we talked Friday about the different discrepancies in the different numbers. So there's Jarvis, which is voter credit. What you see on your voter record is that you voted. We have the ePolls, which is the check-ins, and then of course we have the number of ballots cast. So first I'm going to bridge the numbers between Jarvis and the number of ballots cast, and then I'll bridge ePolls and check-ins. So the Jarvis numbered list as of Friday was 293,456. I say it was because the reason that Jarvis and ePolls never tie together is because once you're checked in an ePolls, your credit stays there for that election. Your check-in's not going anywhere. However, in Jarvis, if you vote in Cobb, right, and then you move and they take your voter registration, that credit goes with you. So we lose a voter credit, even though they voted here in Cobb. It's just an imperfection with Jarvis. Secretary of State is aware of. They know about it. So when I checked the Jarvis list yesterday, we were 10 less. We had 10 people that other counties have moved out. A lot of small counties certify on Friday, so they start keying first thing the next workday. So that's why we would have 10 less. And I'll show in a minute, we knew about 5 already. So we have 54 known discrepancies, which I'm going to walk through in a minute, which gets us to a total adjudicated Jarvis number list of 293,510. So when I'm using the word adjudicated, which I'm going to use a lot over the next 5 slides, the purpose of that for this conversation is taking the known discrepancies and adjudicating the number to that so we can get all three of those numbers to tie as closely as possible. So that's the use of the word adjudicated here. So we know there's 54 discrepancies. So we're going to add those 54, which gets us to an adjudicated number of 293,510. So this is a list of those known discrepancies, which I believe I talked through probably too quickly on Friday. So we had 44 people that we've identified that they were checked in, but that they don't have credit in Jarvis. There was a list that ePulse identified of 630 voters that they said they assigned credit to that should have had credit from check-ins. 7 of those voters still do not have credit. We have 3 voters who are vote safe, and so they're not going to be on the numbered list, but they're going to have cast ballots because their identity is protected. We have 1 person who was issued ABM credit instead of AIP by the system. We believe this was done by the Knowing team when they were trying to assign credit, and they assigned ABM credit instead of AIP credit. There are 5 people that we identified that we let Knowing know about that checked in at Boots Ward on 11/1, but they don't have credit in Jarvis. We have, when we did this on Friday, 5 people we already had identified had moved out of Cobb, but had voted in Cobb County, and they had already been pulled out by another county. And then we identified 1 person who voted at Collar Park on 10/15. So they checked in, but they don't have credit in Jarvis. And then I added, we know that there were 12 abandoned ballots in AIP. So an abandoned ballot means it was left at the printer or it was left in the carrier. We have the ballot. We know it wasn't cast, but the voter didn't cast it. We can't cast that ballot. Only the voter can. So it goes into an abandoned ballot status. So we know there were 12 because we have those 12. What we don't know is how many ballots walked out the door, right? Which is what I mentioned happens in every election, in every county, in every state that uses paper-based voting. So that's something that we don't know that number for, right? So we're taking away 12 check-ins because we know that there were 12 voters who checked in whose ballots did not go through the scanner. So in order to try to tie those numbers together, we're going to subtract 12 there. So that takes us to that 293,510. So when we look at adjudicating the ballots that were cast, we have 2 scenarios that we know of. So although we know we're not changing the numbers of ballots that were cast, the numbers of ballots that were cast for AIP are 293,617. We're not going to uncast these 3. This is just in the discussion of understanding where the numbers don't match, what we know about, and how we can tie them together. So as mentioned Friday, we know that there were 2 ballots that were scanned twice. It was at different sites. There was a paper jam, and the workers rescanned it, and then the jam later cleared and showed that the ballot was cast. And then we have 1 voter that we know who voted twice, who we talked about on Friday, that's being referred to the Secretary of State for investigation. So those are people who we know that there's only going to be 1 check-in for each of those people, right? So a total of 3 check-ins, but there are 6 ballots that are there. So we're going to subtract those 3 ballots, which gets us to 293,614. So when we look at the numbers together, this is where we have with all of our adjudicated numbers. So that 293,614 ballots, when we add the supplemental voters to the numbered list from ePulse, that gets us to 293,511. I'll talk about the supplemental voters in a minute. And then the adjudicated numbered list from Jarvis is 293,510. So we have those numbers almost completely tied together as best as we can with Jarvis being Jarvis. So now we have to bridge this gap, right, between the ballots cast and then the check-ins and the credit. So the difference between the ballots cast and ePulse is 103, and the difference between the ballots cast and Jarvis is 104. So when we look at the discrepancies by site, this is how we're able to tie out 101 of those 103 ePulse discrepancies. So this chart shows us by site some different numbers. So the first column is obviously the site. The second column is at the very last day when they were done voting. They took the total number of ballots that were scanned at their precinct. and they subtracted the number of check-ins that they had across all their poll pads. And this was the difference. So you can see Northwest had 13 more ballots cast than they had check-ins. Northeast, 31 more ballots cast than they had check-ins, and so on. Then we have the supplemental voters. So we know we have 215 supplemental voters. So a supplemental voter is someone who should have been in the poll pad, but they weren't. So that voter is able to vote a regular ballot. Their ballot goes through the scanner, but they're not able to be checked in on the poll pad. So those voters are on a supplemental list, which I have the numbered supplemental list. I have a copy for y'all to review. And those were a total of 215. There was one day for some reason of keying that was not updated in the poll pad. We don't know why. We reported it when we realized that there was a connection there. But that's why we had a higher number of supplemental voters than we would normally. So when we take that supplemental voters and we subtract that difference, because now we know there should have been 9 check-ins, right, at Northwest, because those are the supplemental voters, that gives us a difference of 4. So this difference column is when we subtract the supplemental voters from the poll pad scanner difference. That gives us the true delta of how many check-ins we should have from that site that we don't have currently. So we have 4 check-ins from Northwest that we know we have to have, but we're missing because of the e-poll syncing issue. 16 at Northeast, 4 at Southeast, and so on. So that's a total of 101, which once we assign those, once we find and identify those 101 voters, and we identify them and assign them credit, that'll bring us to just a delta of 2 between the e-polls check-ins and the ballots cast, which I believe it's going to be a lot more check-ins, not a lot more check-ins than 101, because we know that at some point one of those days a ballot walked out the door. There's no way that didn't happen. It happens every election. So if a ballot walked out the door at Northwest, for example, then there would be 5 check-ins that were missing. So this is the minimum number of check-ins that we're missing from the e-pulse report that we're hoping this new report will give us. You can see I gave a column of what that percent is of their total ballots cast. You can see most of these are less than 1 per day. Some of them are less than a couple per week when you look at where those check-ins are missing. And so you can see none of them are at 1 full percent of the percent of ballots cast at that site. And you can see that the larger numbers typically correspond to our busier sites, which makes sense because it's a volume issue that we have when we look at the relative difference between both. So like I said, in theory, there should be a few sites that have more check-ins than what we see here, but we know that this is a minimum. So even if there are more, let's say there were 2 ballots that walked out the door in AIP, then that would exactly tie out between check-ins to Jarvis to ballots cast. So with that, questions?
I have questions. Per usual, I will defer to the balance of the board and then fill in any gaps or blanks. But thank you for the report as well as the comprehensive effort that's been undertaken to attempt to identify the gaps between information as provided by the vendor, knowing what's in Jarvis, and then obviously the numbers that we have based upon the recap sheets.
I have quite a few questions.
Okay.
Originally, you were talking about the number of affected voters that we couldn't find from knowing. You listed 800 and what?
So what they identified was 813 possible timestamps. However, as the team has gone through, they have found, just like they said, that there are a lot of false positives. And when they were working through, they had identified 5 that did correspond to a voter certificate, but they also found several dozen that did not.
So what is a false positive exactly?
It's just saying that there was something on their end that they think a voter might have been checked in there, so they're sending us the timestamp, but it could have been a reissued card, it could have been any type of activity on the poll pad.
That we were unable to find a certificate for?
Yes.
So how many is that?
We don't know yet. We just got the list at 12:30 this morning, just after midnight. So the staff has just started working through it today.
If I might add on to be certain, when you say the staff is working through that, what will that process be as it relates to these 813 timestamps? And then if you'll also confirm what that timestamp is again, like the intent, the perceived intent of sharing, quote, a timestamp with us. What was the purpose behind that?
Sure. I'm gonna pull up the email. So the staff hopes to be done with fully adjudicating all the credit by the end of next week, which is well before the 60 days as prescribed by law. So we're hopeful about that. But the email I received from Knowing from David Greenwald, who's the Southeast Election Director for Knowing, who we work very closely with, he said that the DevOps team successfully extracted data from the log files to identify approximate timestamps near an application being printed and a DVS card creation without a corresponding saved sync record. This process aimed to narrow the universal of printed applications without corresponding voter credit. Using the log files and the processing sequence of these applications, our team identified 813 possible timestamps to assist in narrowing the research of printed applications. And then he explains a little bit more. The attached file should assist in identifying additional applications for voter credit. The time printed on an application will be just before, but not later than the DVS card create timestamp. All records will not have a corresponding printed application, including the 813 records. Included are the 813 records are a number of false positives created when the poll worker used the re-encode card function. So anytime they had to re-encode someone's card.
So, this is across the board at all locations?
For all AIP locations, correct.
And they pulled that from the numbered list that they saw?
No, so we
Deficit?
gave them the daily reconciliation sheets, the spreadsheets, and they were able to see where the scanners got off. So where this cumulative, this column here, the cumulative, that's broken up by every single day at every single site. So they looked at those, and that's when they saw them off. That's, I guess, when they went and looked for timestamps, and that's what they provided to us.
Do they know why this is occurring?
I have not been given an answer outside of this syncing issue.
Okay. And, I'm not exactly sure on all your numbers on Jarvis versus discrepancy versus numbered list.
Okay.
The original Jarvis number is what?
293456. That was as of Friday.
But what is that pulling from?
That's pulling from voter credit. Who has voter credit in Jarvis for voting AIP?
So where does the discrepancy come from in 54?
From these numbers here. So those are we know that there's a discrepancy in terms of the total delta between the Jarvis credit and check-ins. These are what we know about. These are scenarios that we know we can account for, and it takes us to a total of 54.
Okay.
If I might follow on, and take this kind of one by one. I know last Friday we spoke about the 630 that we believe that we've been in communication with Knowing, and they indicated that they were going to provide manual credit. So presumably we had a list of voter reg IDs.
Right.
We provided that information to them, and of that 630, at the time that this report was printed, they'd only provided manual credit for 623,
Correct.
resulting in that 7.
Correct.
Okay. Vote safe, we understand what that is. That's why we have the 3. I guess I'm fine with all of these. I want to jump, or the majority of these, I want to jump back up to the 44.
Mm-hmm.
If you will explain, I guess, how you arrived or how the team arrived at this 44. checked in, no credit in Jarvis.
Those were just people, as we realized there was a large discrepancy, they started doing their own research and just trying to go through and see where they could find gaps. And those were 44 that they were able to identify. That a lot of times it was people, as Ms. Grubbs mentioned, people emailing us saying, why don't I have voter credit? I voted, for AIP, it was 2 weeks ago, right? So we were able to go in, check them in e-polls, see, okay, this person has a check-in. Why aren't they have credit in Jarvis? And then we were able to assign credit in Jarvis. So some of those are people who emailed or called. Some are just, they started looking at sites and days where they knew the numbers were off and they were able to identify some. So a small chunk of what they were able to identify in the over week plus we've had since the conclusion of AIP.
Okay, and we've identified them that they, as of today, right now at 4 p.m., they do not presently have credit in Jarvis?
Correct.
Okay.
So we were waiting until we saw what the solution from Knowing was going to be before we did anything, because we didn't want wires to get crossed and the voters get double credit or anything like that. So we noted all of these scenarios and we're holding until we saw the solution that Knowing was able to provide, which we now know is
The 813 timestamps.
correct. So we'll go through and manually assign all these voters credit. And maybe they're a part of the timestamps and maybe they're not. We're not sure till we get through all of them.
I'll come back to the timestamps. Go ahead, Ms. Fisher.
It's way too complicated.
I agree.
It's way too complicated.
I agree.
And the amount of problems created, not by Cobb elections, I want to make that clear, by Jarvis and EPOS is, it's quite frankly disturbing. Paper check-ins, paper ballots. Might be a better way to go.
Yeah, that's why
Until
we're
they can fix it.
that's why we're really grateful to have the voter certificates, that we have that paper record. And what we always do with those voter certificates is that we scan them after every election and we upload them to our software that we use to house documents, which is OnBase, and we associate them to your voter registration record. So anytime, we use it a lot when we're assisting with investigations, if they need to compare signatures, I can go back and pull all your voter certificates for the past 10 years and show what your signatures look like. So we upload those and associate those to the voter registration record after every single election.
And that process is just a best practice that has been adopted here, or is that mandated by?
I don't think it's mandated. It's just something that we do here. We've done for several years now. So we've backdated a lot of old applications that we had because it helps keep our evidence room clear. Because as soon as we upload them and have them associated, then we can legally destroy them because we have the digital copy.
Okay, and speaking of those oaths, those applications, and back to this 813 timestamps. So the solution as provided by Knowing, the vendor, is to provide these 813 timestamps, noting that there are likely some false positives there, and looking at the timestamp, the date and timestamp as provided by them, and what we have on those receipts, those oaths, the applications. It's going to be a manual process that our team would need to undertake. So if there's a timestamp that said November the 1st at 2:55 p.m., are those timestamps minimally provided by precinct?
Yeah, so it's by site. So they're able to go and pull, we batch the voter certificates by 50. So they're able to go and pull the batches that are around that time, and they look through them and they say who has credit around that time and who doesn't have credit around that time with the timestamp. Because all of the voter certificates are timestamped as well.
Understood. So it's that manual process,
Yes.
looking at the document or the information that's been provided by Knowing, isolating it for Boots Ward, and then going and pulling all of the receipts, if you will, the applications for Boots Ward, based on the timestamps, look at the stacks of 50 as they're batched there in the precinct, and trying to tie and identify Tori Silas that voted in that location on November the 1st at 2:55. And then there might be a timestamp that's associated at 2:57 and backing into it that way.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So I would like to bring up one other comment that I think is really important. And that is the request that we get the numbered list from Knowing and Jarvis, because that's something we never look at until after certification. This whole thing rose to the top because of those numbered lists, which I think are incredibly important, because it's a double check on who actually voted.
Right. And we knew we were off. I mean, the first day of the second week, we realized that was the first time we reported an issue to Knowing. So we knew we were off in the second week of AIP. So we knew that, yes. And then we had that was the red cloud issue, which I reported to the board about the red clouds.
Okay.
And then we realized what the red clouds meant, and we have compiled all of the reports that we've sent into Knowing. A lot of times it's a phone call, so it's hard to document those, but I have emails that we've reported these issues with dating back to the second week of AIP.
Thank you.
To Ms. Fisher's point about these numbered lists not being provided to us until after certification, it's not a matter of us making that request and you not providing it to us. It's not provided by the vendors and or the Secretary of State until after certification. Am I correct?
Yeah, I have the election day numbered list, which I provided on the flash drive to y'all on Friday,
Right.
both the Jarvis list and the AIP and the ePulse list, excuse me. But I don't know if we ever got a Jarvis or an ePulse AIP numbered list. I don't know if they sent an official report or if they were waiting to try to figure this out. We can go in and pull that report,
Right.
and that's how we get the number, but I don't think we've gotten an official numbered list from AIP, but I have to double
Typically,
check.
they don't send that for a week after certification.
Right.
Which, as you can see, is problematic.
Right, but we did have it for election day, we had it on Friday, and that's how I was able to include it on the flash
But you
drive.
requested that list.
Yes,
It's not automatically
yes.
sent.
I think they
You
sent another one yesterday, and it was the exact same as ours, so I don't know if that's because they sent it to everyone, but I did get one, it was either yesterday or this morning from them.
With respect to, does anyone else, I don't want to, I have just a list of questions.
Besides, I just want to remind everybody,
Yes,
you got to certify by 5, so I know we got a lot to cover in
For
the
us,
next 2 sections.
understood.
So I just want, I'm just giving everybody, because I know y'all going to have some absentee questions too, so.
I'm happy to hold my
No,
questions.
no.
Thank you.
But
No, that's fine, Mr. White.
we have an hour, or almost an hour.
Yeah, we've got 52 minutes according to my, my laptop, but let's go ahead and move forward and we can come back to them. I do appreciate that, Mr. White, making certain that we are going to meet that time frame. Go right ahead.
So next is ABM. So we had 25,548 absentee by mail ballots that were cast. So you can see we issued 33,105. We received back 79.66% of the issued ballots. And then the other numbers, I apologize, the formatting got off when I moved it to this computer, that we had just 514 rejected ballots. So those bottom 3 percentages are out of the total received, looking at how many received, how many were voted versus how many cured and rejected. So 1.95% were rejected, 1.15% were cured, and that took us to a total voted of 25,548, which was 96.9% of the ballots we received back ended up being voted. So moving on to election day, as I mentioned earlier, a few precincts experienced scanner jams. All the ones that I know I spoke to or I was in the room with, they were due to the diverter tray being too full. And so that caused a lot of scanner jams. So the most common call we had during the first 3 hours of the day was regarding the poll pad printers. This was the first election we used the poll pad printers on election day. So some people just needed a reminder of how to connect those printers to the poll pad because it's done through Bluetooth. So once we walked them through that, it was pretty smooth after that. We didn't have any issues with the printers, and everyone was really excited to have those and said it made the process a lot easier. And then, of course, we had 2 precincts that opened 20 minutes late, both due to not having the poll pad set up on time to check voters in. So they actually opened the doors at 7, but they couldn't get their first voters checked in until 7:20 because it was just a little human error on getting the poll pads set up in a timely manner. So that was no fault to the poll pads themselves. So they both stayed open until 7:20 p.m. As ordered by the court. When we look at post-election day, we have our official and complete results, which you have before you in the summary. So election day, we saw 86,274 voters at 16.69% of the turnout. Advanced voting, we saw 293,617, which got us 56.81% of the turnout. Absentee by mail, 25,548 at 4.94%. We had a total of 606 provisional ballots that were cast. That's across ABM, AIP, and Election Day. 0.12% of the turnout for a total of 406,445 voters at 78.56%. Just to give a historical perspective, here's a comparison against 2020 and 2022. So you can see we had pretty major turnout. We can see the big change between the COVID election and kind of how the numbers have really evened out a lot more. And I think now we have a good idea of what will look like in the future moving forward. So those are the numbers I have as it relates to certification. The next is risk limiting audit. If you want to do certification questions first, whatever the board prefers.
Great. And I just want to note for the board, especially those that don't have a laptop in front of you, we were all seated here at 3:08. I know a few have sent text messages about the statement of voters cast. So you have that in your inbox. I note that document is 1,095 pages long, hence the reason it was emailed and not printed. So times 5.
When was that sent?
At 3:08 p.m. That's what I was saying as we were sitting here. I don't know if there was a specific question, but to the point that someone has texted me, a few of you have texted me about where that location of that document is. I just wanted to share that it is in your inbox. The document itself is 1,095 pages long, hence the reason it was not printed, I assume is
Yes.
Well, there are some differences in the SOBC and the summary report on numbers. So,
Would you like me to pull it up on the screen?
That was going to be my next point. If you'll just pull up,
No,
if there's
because I went off of the one we were given Friday, and a lot of those numbers have changed, so whether there's still discrepancies, I don't know.
Okay.
there's the opportunity, Ms. Fisher, to, given the summary report that we have in front of us and the ability to put the statement of votes cast on the screen, those questions can still be raised. And we can just make that inquiry now, if you'd like to.
I have a question.
Yes, sir, go right ahead.
Hey, can you call up the summary report?
Yes. Let me open both. The statement of votes cast. Okay, election summary report.
There it is. This is a question that Debbie asked me before we started, and I didn't have an answer. Why does it say precincts reported 0 of 148?
I have no idea. All of our final results have always said that. I don't know if it's a programming issue with the software, but when I was looking at pulling all the historical numbers, they all said 0 out of 148. I don't know if it changes when they become official. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to ask Dominion.
Yes to that.
On the
Yes.
summary report, can you scroll down to the write-ins for the president?
Sure.
Can you explain those numbers?
Sure. So you can see that the total for the certified write-ins are here, and then the unresolved write-ins are here. So those are our Kirby Smarts, our Mickey Mouses, our Jesuses, those ones.
Can you tell me why the write-ins above are so high?
So
Should those
high.
not be actual votes?
I don't think I understand what you're asking.
Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Chase Oliver, Jill Stein, De La Cruz, Cornel West, write-in, 743. If those are Mickey Mouse, Santa Claus, Jesus Christ, I saw some other ones that were pretty funny. Why does that say 743 instead of the actual write-ins that were tallied?
That's down here. So on election night, or when we upload the results, the tallies have to be done separately. So that's why that's the total write-in numbers were 743. And then when you break it out below, you can see that one for Mr. Keynes, I don't know his name, 51 for Mr. Sonsky, Bowman had 7, Yaduri had 5, and then
Yeah, but
the other two, and you
when-
add those, it's 676 is
I
743.
get that, but when we upload the total votes for the presidential race,
Right.
is that gonna be reflective of that 743?
Are these gonna be showing on the website? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I think it's important to count the actual number of votes cast that are legitimate, not the ones that aren't legitimate,
Yes.
which totals 1,874 votes.
That's what these are. So now that we have these, so we can't do the write-ins until after all the provisional votes are in, because we have to do all of them together. So now that we have all the write-ins, so these were all zeros at the Friday meeting, and then we've
I
entered them.
understand.
So now when we upload the official results,
Didn't we do that Friday?
no, because it's not official until you guys vote to certify. So now that we have, once the vote to certify is completed, then we'll upload the final and complete results, which include the write-in candidates, the certified write-in candidates, I should say.
So in other words, what will be certified is 67 write-in votes for election day, 54 advance, absentee by mail 2, provisional 4, for a total of 123 instead of whatever that total is down there at the end, correct?
I don't think I understand what you're asking. Because we only break out certified write-ins. We don't break out all the other write-in options. We're not gonna show, that Kirby Smart got 73 votes,
That's kind of my point.
right? But that's the law.
How many votes were cast for a legitimate write-in voter,
It's 1 plus 51 plus 7 plus 5 plus 1 plus 2.
which we have no total for?
I mean, that's the
Those
report.
were the numbers I just read to you.
Yeah, I can't change the way the report is structured.
I know. What I'm asking you is the total of those votes will be what we upload when we certify the election? Or are we certifying 743 write-in votes for election day?
What you see is what will be posted. So the breakout of the certified write-ins will be posted. I must be misunderstanding.
I'm not entirely certain I'm following the question either, Ms. Fisher. So what you've done is the official write-ins at the top. You've deducted that from the unresolved write-ins. I'm sorry, you've deducted the unresolved write-ins from the official at the top.
I didn't do anything with the unresolved. I just added the votes that they show for each candidate.
I think that
It's
they're not summed down because they sum them across here,
Across.
because it's just like how these are summed by candidate up here.
Okay, so.
They're
it would
also
be-
summed. You
okay,
can see
so
Mr.
what-
Sonsky got a total of 105 across all 4
Okay,
methods of
so the
voting.
total of that would be 106, 113, I can't remember.
118, 10, I'm sorry, I don't need these for reading far. So that's 10, so the 3 and the 105, that's 108, plus another 7, plus 5, plus 1, plus 2. That would be the total write-ins, correct?
Which I believe.
Certified write-ins.
Certified write-ins.
Yes.
And those will be the numbers we're certifying.
Yes. You're certifying the numbers that are here in front of you.
I believe the question, if I might, that's being asked, to the extent that when you add down at the top, your total votes in that lower right-hand column or field equals the 404,859. Clearly, that's not the case with respect to that same column in the write-in, such that the 3,105,751 1 and 2 clearly does not equate to 1874.
Yes, this
And I
is,
understand that you nor any of us can control how this calculates, but I believe, Ms. Fisher, is that the question, correct?
Yeah, it is. So when we get the final results for how many votes were cast in the presidential race,
that's,
right? Will it be the total of 1,997 write-ins, or are we certifying 123 write-ins?
it's 1,997 write-ins and 123 of those write-ins were for certified write-in candidates. So it's, both things are true.
If you take that 1874 at the bottom and add the individual numbers above that, it goes back up to that 1997.
All right.
This is just like
Pretty confusing.
an other category. So it's a catch-all for everyone else.
Pretty confusing. Thank you.
And then I have the statement of votes cast up as well.
Does anyone have questions? Well, I'm sorry, Ms. Fisher, did you have any further questions?
Not on the summary.
Okay.
I do have questions about the SOBC unregistered voters not matching this, but like I said, that was from the report from Friday.
Okay, understood. It's presently 20 after 4. We have 40 minutes. Is that do you believe that any of those are questions that you want to raise just generally now? It might not.
Well, it's
you may
really
not
not
reference a
gonna
specific
make
number.
a difference anyway, but I will raise the issue that
Sure.
on the different reports that we received and the one I pulled from the Secretary of State, there's 3 different numbers on registered voters.
Okay.
So I'll just raise that issue. They're all 3 different.
Okay.
And I'm satisfied with just noting there's 3 different numbers.
Okay, and that's what I wanted minimally to obviously,
Which
I
may
don't
be
provide you
part
with
of
that
the-
opportunity, but invite
Which
you to
may
share
be
that.
part of the bullpen problem
Right,
when
right.
it comes down to it. So,
Okay.
all right.
Does anyone else have questions with respect to the report as provided or presented, as well as the election summary report and the statement of votes cast? And Ms. Paul, did you have anything further to add with regard to any of those?
No.
Okay.
I do want to check one quick thing
Absolutely, go right ahead.
on the totals. On the earlier report, the total votes on the summary page was 404,848. The total on the down ballot race was 404,803. Now, again, I'm going off the report from Friday. So,
Countywide. So yeah, so countywide, I see for county commission chairperson, it's 404,803. That would be people that cast blank. They skip that race. So that's how many total races were marked. How many times that race was voted. So that would be approximately 40, in that case, 40-ish people who left that race blank.
left what race blank?
I'm looking at county commission chairperson. So it'd just be how many times it was cast. So anytime someone skips that, it's less than. It'll be the same on the new report as well.
Okay.
Clerk of Superior Court, 405,995. When countywide, we had 406,000 1,045. So that would be 50 people who left that race blank, give or take a few.
Sure. Go ahead.
I'd like to move to certify the November 5th general election numbers.
Was that?
There's been a motion to certify the November 5th general election results as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Mosbacher, Ms. Affred, for the motion and the second. Noting the time. Is there any discussion, further discussion? Hearing none, and we'll take this by voice vote, please. All those in favor of certifying the election results, if you'll just state your name and your vote, starting to my right. Ms. Mosbacher.
Jennifer Mosbacher, yes. Stacy Afrod, yes.
Mr. Green.
Steve, yes.
Ms. Fisher.
Debbie, yes, with some reservations, which I will hand you my list of reservations to be attached to our certification, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you.
Tori Silas, yay. The motion passes unanimously.
I'll have you guys sign this after the meeting, but
Certainly.
they'll be publishing them now. That way we meet the 5 o'clock deadline.
Okay, great. Moving on to the next item in your report.
So we have the risk limiting audit. Originally on the Secretary of State calendar, it was scheduled for Thursday and Friday of this week. Normally it's 2 days. However, they sent out an email on Friday letting us know that they'd be doing the dice roll Thursday morning and that we could begin Friday morning. So we will start Friday morning at 9 a.m. and we'll go till 5 p.m. We're going to go ahead and schedule Monday and Tuesday. We're not sure how many batches will be pulled or the size of those batches. We won't know that to the dice roll on Thursday. So if we feel the need to extend into the weekend, we will, if they do a large portion. But right now we're just scheduled Friday, Monday, Tuesday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're getting a lunch break from noon to 1. The parties have been notified. They can send 10 observers each of their 10 teams. We'll have it here right across the hall in the AIP room. And then, like I said, should we say randomly selected Thursday, November 14th. So they'll do the dice roll tomorrow.
And you noted that the parties have been advised.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
I sent them an email first thing this morning. I think it was yesterday morning.
Questions with respect to RLA?
Okay, so next we'll jump into the special election schedule, if that sounds good.
Yes.
So we have, since we don't have a runoff, this is our proposed schedule that the board had previously voted on 2 schedules, one depending on if there was December runoff or not. So now that we thankfully don't have one, this is where we've landed. So we will have qualifying December 18th through the 20th. And it'll be 2.5 days as calls for special elections. We will have the primary on February 11th. AIP will start January 21st. We will have, if necessary, a runoff on March 11th, starting AIP March 3rd. And then we'll have the general election on April 29th, starting on April 7th for AIP. And so that is the schedule as it is before us. And then I have just a slide on AIP proposal, and then I have the final elections calendar for all of 2025 at the end for us to look at as well.
And just to be certain and for clarification, this is one of the options that we previously approved, because we approved an option that contemplated a runoff and one that did not. Obviously, with no runoff, this would be how we would move forward. So at this point, I believe it's really just a matter of adopting the schedule for the non-runoff schedule. Yes, Ms. Bree.
I think one thing that's very important that we advise the public and the parties and the candidates of is that the data currently in MVP under my voter page has not been updated for the new maps.
Correct.
The commission maps, per the legislature. It is still the maps under the old home rule maps, because we could not change the data in the MVP at this point in time, not until the state certifies the election, which is not until the 22nd.
Yes, next spring.
Right, so we will be, our registration team will be starting to revise the MVP data. The 25th, I think, was the Monday following certification. So people should be aware that that's a 2 or 3 week process to make those changes, so that our hope is that that's all done by the qualifying, by the 18th, December 18th. But there's no guarantee that we can get all that done. We believe we can, but that's a difficult process. So how are we going to address that and make sure we don't get any candidates qualifying for the wrong district and get into a kerfuffle as we did last March?
Sure. So the staff feels confident that they'll be able to get the redistricting done. So when we did the previous redistricting and we had to create all new ballot combos, which I know I talked at length about, they went ahead and put in the ballot combos for the state drawn map as well. So now we just have to go in and assign street files to those ballot combos. So half the work is done. So happy Thanksgiving to the registration staff, because that's what they'll be doing. But in the event that we're not finished, I already spoke with our registration manager, and we said that we would do what we do when we qualify at the municipals, where we actually send a registrar to check the candidate's address and to be sure that they're qualifying in the right location. That's what we do anytime we do qualifying at the municipal level, because it has to be at their city hall. So we'll send someone from our staff that's also a notary to assist with that process to make sure that everyone is qualified in the correct district. So if we're not done in that event, that is our plan, and it's common practice for us, like I said, with municipals.
I think that's a really good point. So thank you for bringing that up. When we start publishing information about the upcoming special election, I think it's important to say, like, disclaimer or note to whoever's reading this that you cannot use MVP until this date to identify if you are part of that special election or not, because I feel like voters are going to be confused if they see District 2 special election is happening, and I used to be in District 2. I'm now moved to District 3. So I would need to know, is this an election I'll be voting in or not?
Yeah, and as soon as you're absolutely right, and we've gotten calls about that as well. As soon as we complete redistricting, we'll send out precinct cards to everyone. So we'll do precinct cards again. So everyone will get mailed a card with their updated districts, and that'll include their commission district. We'll be sure anytime we're posting, whether it's news updates on the website or on social media, that we provide that information. I hope everyone will be focused on the holidays, because then this will be done before Christmas, and then that can be our Christmas gift to our voters, is their postcards. So that's the goal.
Doesn't my voter page already reflect the legislative district? I don't recall they ever changed it.
They did. Once we did the redistricting in Jarvis, it immediately updates our MVP.
Okay.
So I'm also like Stacy. I'm a District 2 home rule, District 3 state drawn, but mine shows District 2 because it's still under the home rule map, because we haven't been able to redistrict.
And just to be certain, and for clarification, we were unable to redistrict, but because by the time that this matter was resolved, we were too close to this current election, correct?
Correct, and we can't start until the state certifies, at risk of moving voters and causing an issue with their voter credit.
So are we going to send new voter cards to all Cobb voters?
Yes,
So it'll, even those in District 1 and District 3,
Yep.
which are not up for election, will get new voter cards.
absolutely. We want everyone to understand exactly who their commissioner is. So that's the goal.
On that note,
Yes.
can we please let the board know what the QA process is for those precinct cards?
Yes.
Like, I feel like I would like to see sort of a 1, 2, 3 detailed what our plan is before those are going out the door.
Yes, we'll need to talk internally because the state's vendor for the precinct cards has changed. And so we need to decide, and I think we can talk, and then I can bring that to the December meeting, and we can talk about whether we want to use that vendor based on what we know, or whether we want to use our own vendor, like what we did with the larger yellow cards that we mailed out during the previous redistricting process. That was our own vendor that we engaged for that. So we can get a little bit more intel on the new vendor, which is knowing, and look at what they're able to provide versus what we know we can provide to an outside vendor. So I'll get that together and present that at the December meeting if that is sufficient, or would you like that sooner?
I'm fine with it at the December meeting. Obviously, if they're, well, put it this way, I think the sooner the better. Let me take that.
Okay.
Minimally, or, at the very latest, provided at the December meeting. Then the other piece of that, the QA process, I personally would like to see what it looks like. Just because we've sent a number of precinct cards over the last 12 months. And if there's a way that we can distinguish what is being updated here, obviously it's going to have everything, but really to draw our voters' attention to this. In light of the number of precinct cards we've sent, I don't think it's not, to me, it's not a matter of a disengaged electorate just tossing it to the side. I think it's just kind of, receiving so many. That might lend itself to using our own vendor, but we'll obviously hear what your and the team's recommendation is.
And I just want to be sure we take a step back before we send anything out,
Yes.
that we're looking at process and how we're communicating with voters. And if we can be involved in that process and give some feedback, great. But if not, mostly, I feel like I do want to see what the plan is for the QA before those cards leave this office.
Sure,
That's my
absolutely.
request.
My request is, I have to add on to that, I believe it is a process that the board should be involved in minimally to lay eyes on it prior to it going out.
Not a problem, absolutely.
Well, I do also
Mhm.
highly recommend we get this done as soon as humanly possible, because this last round of voter ID cards, people were receiving in the second and third week of early voting.
The voter guides?
Precinct cards.
They got the
precinct
voter
cards.
guides even later than they got their precinct cards, but I know a lot of people received their voter cards around that time, i.e. Roswell 02.
Yes.
So, getting it after voting has already started, just shouldn't happen.
I agree, absolutely.
And just a reminder, we'll need to publish a call for this. So you could do that today when you adopt the schedule and vote to publish the call, but you can also do that in December because it's just got to be 29 days before the election.
I think we have time, but if, we want to go ahead and modify.
I just want to, you could either do it today or December or something.
When you say a call, you're saying the call for this election, with this schedule?
You've got to publish a call 29 days before the election to fill a vacancy, basically because it's a special election and under 21-540, it's up to the superintendent to issue the call for a special election 29 days before.
So something we need to take a vote
I
on.
say
So-
since we haven't already written it out, we wait.
And it's fine. December will be fine as long as you're doing it before qualifying. That way you can get it in writing. But I'm just I'm reminding everybody, if you don't do it today, we got to do it in December.
Is there anything that's going to change between now and then to prevent this, that makes it not a good idea to do it today?
I mean, other than not having it in writing right now. I just wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page with the schedule. I can write one out for you real quick if you want to question, but it's fine to do it in December too.
The only thing I can think of is we might want to make I'm sure we got it all uploaded to Jarvis and there are no glitches. So, that would probably be a good thing to confirm before
That would be the advantage of waiting
waiting,
until
yeah,
the
yes,
December meeting,
yes,
so we know that
yes, well,
MVP has been updated. And
yes,
that's
yes,
really where so much confusion came from, is people would go to MVP because that's the gospel. Well, it wasn't the gospel, and the getting that done and assuring it's done and telling people, yes, go to MVP, that this, it works,
Mhm.
is really important, so
So then,
I would wait,
at least to my left, I believe I'm hearing you're in favor of waiting
yes.
with respect to calling for the election.
yes.
Stacy and Jennifer.
That reasoning makes sense, so I'm fine with that.
Me too.
Okay, good. Is there anything further with respect to the 2025 special election schedule and any other topics that are related thereto?
Yes. Do we have all of the precincts confirmed that we have access?
For 2025?
Yes. That's this one.
No, not yet. So we'll do that starting today. So now that the election is certified, we can start working on next year.
And just as an FYI, we do have to call for, at some point, a motion to adopt this, given the fact that we approved 2 different schedules. But go ahead, Mr. Pruitt.
I think we should do that in, no, I forgot the question.
I apologize.
I do have a slide on proposed AIP.
Oh,
if
AIP
we wanna discuss
locations
that.
and number of AIP sites. Obviously, I don't think we need that. I don't think there will be the voter turnout
Yes.
for these elections, particularly the primary and the possible runoff. There's going to be very low participation,
Right.
a lot of voter burnout. And so I would suggest we do what we did in one of the previous elections and just have 2 per district and plus the headquarters.
So in the previous runoff that we had, we did 1 per district. So this is what the staff has proposed. With using our main office, we have to be open. We're centrally located in District 2. And then the South Cobb Community Center for District 4, which is one of our busiest AIP sites. We have not confirmed South Cobb Community Center. This is just the staff and I talking this morning, wanting to bring our initial thoughts to y'all so we could marinate and I can confirm what sites are available prior to the December meeting. But we were thinking that it would be best to do the minimum hours as required by law, which is Monday through Saturday for those 3 weeks from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then we would just have our office and then the South Cobb Community Center at District 4. So 1 per site. That's what we did when we had the runoff in June. We did 1 per congressional district in addition to our main office, because our main office, I believe, was outside of one of those. But since we're centrally located in 2, because the other locations that we would have would be here in Smyrna, at the Smyrna Community Center, and then kind of over here, either in Austell or in a Powder Springs area. So at that point, we would have all 3 of these would be kind of in a line, and then the office would be kind of serving, I guess, this area up here. But we believe the suspected low turnout for this election would lend itself to just having 2 sites.
The only concern is it's a long ways from the south end of District 2 to the main office, and same thing from the left side of District 4 to South Cobb Community Center. I have concerns that will be a big disincentive for people coming for AIP. And, I'm not anxious to spend extra money, but it just seems like 2 would be maybe Smyrna and Maine and someplace
Powder Springs.
over toward the west side and the South Cobb Community Center. would be a better, more inclusive.
Well, I think turnout will be better because this is a new election in which you're going through a primary, whereas in a runoff, you're not doing that. So, I think turnout would be higher than a runoff. Most people don't even recognize a runoff.
Let's hope.
They have been waiting on this election. I
think reducing it to just one per district is cutting too far.
Well, I can talk to those locations and get a final proposal that is more in line with that, with the number of sites for the December meeting, so we can approve everything together. Typically, we've just done one election at a time, so we can either just say the primary for this, and then we can address a runoff and a general later, or I leave that however y'all want to slice that. So I'll look at the 4 sites total. What about the hours? Those are the minimum
good with
hours
the
and days
hours.
prescribed by law.
I'm always going to be a fan of 7 to 7, but I'm a working parent, and to me, that's the time that I need. So
We're hoping to capture that by being the 9 to 5 on Saturdays, but it's the board's decision.
I know that there's also been an effort by this board to, where possible, have consistency such that we're not changing to the extent that we can be consistent. Monday through Friday is generally 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., obviously allowing for some flexibility given the nature of the election or which election it is, either on Saturdays and Sundays, allowing for that flexibility. So perhaps it's a matter of, to Mr. Bruning's point, going back and confirming the availability of a total of 2 locations, AIP locations in each district, and perhaps speak with them about once we identify the locations, come back and we discuss the hours, since we won't be taking a vote today anyway.
Okay.
At least not with respect to that.
I will speak with the facilities and see where we're at.
Siri agrees.
And then just the last thing I have is our election calendar for the remainder for all of next year, the remainder. So we have the different dates laid out. So you can see the first 3 are the ones we've already talked about. And then the last 3 are the ones that we haven't. So we have our Public Service Commission statewide primary. It's going to be June 17th. So that'll be across Cobb County, across the state. And then November 4th, we'll have our the PSC statewide general, and the munis will be there. And then December 2nd will be any muni runoffs that we have. So we have yet to get an official election calendar from the Secretary of State, which is what I wait on to let the municipalities know when the election's going to be. So they've been chomping at the bit. So I'm hoping we can get that soon, so I can get with the municipalities and see how many and who and where, and we can get rolling on the latter half of next year. That is all I have for the election, our new business presentation.
So with that, again, I believe at this point, we need to entertain a motion to adopt. Director Paul, do you mind going back to the schedule? To adopt this special election schedule?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. It's been moved and properly seconded to adopt the proposed 2025 special election schedule as shown here. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? The motion passes. All right, moving on to the next item on our agenda. Did you have any further update?
I don't have any more slides, but I just had a few things that I'd like to say, if that's okay.
Certainly.
I think I covered pretty much everything in the slides, but I did want to extend so much thanks to a lot of people in this room, and of course the board for helping us work through the ABM issue that we had in the last week of AIP. And then we had people that showed up, your neighbors, your spouses, your children showed up to help. help us get through that. And it was a lot, and it was a lot of hours. I think that week I put in 89 hours in this office, and I never want to do that again. I appreciate, and it's really hard for me to put into words how much it meant to me for us to all come together and just show up and do it and get it done. It was really special, and like I said, it's a special memory I hope to never repeat. And then a lot of the people here that showed up and helped with duplication, thank you. We could not have done this without y'all. It was a lot of work, and I know that duplication is probably not the most fun activity, but it was great to see everyone come together and us all just serve Cobb voters together, and it was a really special memory that I'll have for the rest of my life. And so I'm really grateful to y'all. And then I can't even begin to thank the staff, the work that they put in, the blood, sweat, and tears that we put into this election, and now it's just over. And that's kind of crazy to think about. That's something that we've been working on well before I got here a year ago, is just done. And I think overall, like I said, when we look at the total program, I think we did a really, really good job. And I think that we were able to serve Cobb voters, and it was so great to see all of those positive comments come in. And so I'm just so proud of them, and I really can't put into words how much they mean to me. And so that's all.
Thank you, Director Paul. I have comments that I will defer to the board member comments section, but just with respect to an update, I know there are a couple of topics that we've deferred taking action on until after the election, and gratefully for us, we don't have a runoff. And so I just wanted to raise those in everyone's hearing, such that we can refocus some of our attention or direct some of our attention on those things, that being the bylaws for the board, as well as a communication policy. And I think there are a number of other topics that have just come up in the course of navigating this election cycle. So I just wanted to minimally raise those two, and then inquire with everyone else here as to whether there are any other more administrative tasks that you believe we need to undertake in the coming months, such that we can pull that list together and then obviously dole out the work among us. So the bylaws are one. Everyone will recall that there was a specific vote to table those until the new year. But I do believe that it's something we could potentially begin to work on and revisit, such that we're in a position to adopt them as promptly as reasonably possible after the start of the new year. And I know that we've talked about a communication policy for the board for elections. We do not have one. We essentially, for the most part, have been using the county communication policy as provided to us by our Cobb communications director. But I believe that there's been some discussion about adopting one for elections specifically. Those were my two items. I don't know whether anyone has anything further they would like to add.
Maybe by next meeting.
Yeah, by next meeting, perfectly. That's perfectly fine. So
And one thing-
We do still need to vote on that adoption.
you are correct.
Just letting you know, since we passed over that in new business, so.
I thought we just did.
Did we
We just
vote?
adopted it.
We adopted
Yeah.
the special
We
schedule for 2025. Is there something else?
No, we just, I'm sorry. We just adopted that.
I just always say yes.
Okay.
If only not for truth.
I'm gonna write that down. 4:54 on November the 12th.
Like,
Debbie says she always says yes.
like,
One thing that Debbie did bring up that I thought was important in this election cycle was we talked a lot about website updates. Like a lot of us kind of went back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sort of like walks the line between like what our responsibilities are and the staff. But I think something we could do as a board is talk about like a website policy of what things that go up for election specific things, if that makes sense. Like I think that was one of the things Debbie brought up. I thought that was a good point. And I think from a communication and a voter education perspective, that's something our board could adopt as a sort of a website policy, what we want to see. Not necessarily like get into the formatting, but making sure that certain things are front and center.
I think there's a lot of things that we need to do. That's why I'd like to,
Oh, absolutely.
wait until, well, for one, I think as a board, we could come up with some ideas for legislation on what needs to happen to avoid some of the pitfalls we've had.
Okay.
So
Yeah, and
there's
it-
a lot of things. Yes, I can't believe I ignored the website because I'm kind of passionate about that topic.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of them, the bylaws policy. But we could go on and on and on about all the things.
Right, and it, believe you me, it wasn't intended, in my raising it, it wasn't intended to everyone provide their exhaustive list today and then,
Okay.
you know, forever hold your peace thereafter, but minimally wanted to raise it such that we get it back on our to-do list. And so if we all can agree that we will align on hopefully a somewhat comprehensive list, you know, circulate that among ourselves, and then we can talk through, you know, which ones we prioritize at the December meeting, recognizing that, you know, if it's been raised by a member of the board, it does need to be taken up. And there'll need to be, I would suggest there be some prioritization.
Agreed.
With that, unless there is anything further on that topic, we'll go ahead and open it up for board member comments, and I will defer mine to the end. So, who would like to start? Mr. Bruning, we're gonna play teacher. I've never been a teacher. Go ahead, Mr. Bruning.
I don't have any comments there.
Okay. Ms. Affron?
I don't have any comments right now.
Okay. Ms. Fisher?
I do have comments, and one thing I would like to raise is how hard the election workers, whether they're temporary, full-time, part-time, volunteers, how hard they have to work because of all the different steps involved that are so complicated with our elections. And when we were here until 4:30 a.m. election, well, morning after the elections, they stuck with it. They had been here close to 24 hours by that time, I'm guessing. And they had great attitudes about it. And everybody was dead tired, but we got it done. And I would just like to thank all of you and your teams and how you reacted to kind of a difficult situation. It was awesome. I also do want to comment that we do need to do a lot of things to improve our operations. And one thing that I should have thought of is kind of I would like to have a deep dive, and after election deep dive into what we did right with the staff. I think it's important to do it with the staff. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How can we improve? And I think that's also very important to understand how we get better. And so I thank you all.
Ms. Mossbach?
I just would like to say thank you to all of you. It was a pleasure working with all of you through this, even through many long nights and mornings together. I feel like I got to know everyone on the teams, many of you in this space here. Ross, you were with us a lot of times. And I just feel like everybody just really came together as a team, and it was a lot of work. So I appreciate everybody's time and effort. And then I just want to say regarding absentee by mail, I think that we need to tear it apart. I think we just need to really take a hard look and do a serious root cause analysis. I've now been here twice with long nights dealing with, making sure our voters get their ballots. And I just, I don't want to end on a sour note. I know that it's not one person's fault or one process's fault. It's sort of like accumulation of things. And so I'm here to help you. I want to get a good system in place so that we are not at the office until 6:30 in the morning ever again, overnight. If we come in that early, that's one thing, but not having spent the night here. But I do appreciate everyone's effort, and I think we pulled through together, and I appreciate all of you.
Go right ahead.
I know I passed, but.
No,
that
that's
comment-
exactly why I decided to do it, calling everyone. Go right
That
ahead.
comment reminded me, so of course, thank you to the staff, like they said, and I also want to thank another group of people, which are the county staff that don't work for elections, but do work for the county. I think it was on Thursday night before
October
the election,
31st.
October 31st, Halloween,
Yes.
yes.
It was Halloween.
We were doing, pulling out all the stops to get those ballots sent out from the affected list. And when I showed up, I think it was around 5 or 6 o'clock at night, I walked into the office and it felt like 50 people. I don't really know how many, but Dr. McMorris had called in all of her department managers and they had called in their staff. And it was just like, teamwork doesn't even describe what I saw. It was county employees from across the county, from across senior services and libraries and every department you can think of, came in and stayed until the wee hours of the morning on Halloween night. And that was just, I couldn't believe what people were willing to do who aren't even working for elections to get this done.
And thank you. Pardon?
Are we allowed to speak?
The opportunity for the public to speak was at the beginning. I apologize, ma'am.
I just want to say thank you.
Okay, got it.
All workers for all the training and everything.
Right. So I will pick up where Ms. Mossbacher left off to ensure that we do end on a positive note and a note of gratitude from me. But before we get to that, I concur with Jennifer with respect to ABM. There was an eerie sense of deja vu and recognizing that we've been here before twice in 2022 with respect to the general election and the runoff. I will say perhaps it's that experience that we had that then allowed us to adopt a plan, come together and adopt a plan very quickly to ensure that those 3,419 voters, we had undertaken every step that we could to get them their ballots as efficiently and effectively as possible and provide them with the opportunity to get those ballots back to us. So that's a good segue into my gratitude, but we absolutely must tear the process apart and really revisit. And I think, Director Fall, you've heard me talk about kind of the people, process, technology, and I know we've adopted some technology. And as it relates to people, there's also a vendor that's implicated there, but really just reviewing all of our processes, making certain that we've got the right team members with the right skill sets to be certain. And if that's not the case, then let's find the right position for them because we are a great team. And segueing into the great team that we have, my most sincere gratitude to 1,000+ Cobb neighbors. And that's the way that I felt. It's that same sense of family, that same sense of community that Ms. Effort made mention of. There were poll watchers, there were observers, there were monitors, there were poll workers, members of duplication panels, there were members of voter review panels, election staff, election directors, Cobb County employees that I'd never had the opportunity to engage with because on that night, on October the 31st, they came in from senior services, IT. We had members of the staff of members of the Board of Commissioners here, all working across a couple of different training rooms to make certain that we got those ballots packed, triple, quadruple checked, and to USPS at 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the morning. And I do want to, again, I state those times not to pat ourselves on the back, but to really demonstrate the commitment that members of our Cobb family had to those voters. Ballots were taken to two separate USPS locations, one at 3 a.m. and one at 4 a.m. They opened those locations at those hours for us to ensure that our ballots could be scanned and therefore or at least the mail would be scanned such that they would be trackable and not interrupt the normal kind of flow of USPS customers that would obviously be in those locations at 8 a.m. I also thank our sheriff's deputies for their presence. And I also thank my fellow board members. Obviously, we were limited in who could be in the room at the same time, given some of the constraints that we work under. But over the course of this entire election cycle, I've had an opportunity to work, obviously with Mr. Bruning and with Ms. Mossbacher since July of 2021, having joined the board with them. But I've also obviously now had a bonding period with Ms. Efrett and Ms. Fisher. And so my most sincere gratitude as well as to our director and our counsel. And as much he's had to ride with us a little bit as well, given the amount of litigation, but I'm extremely grateful for it all. So if there is nothing further with respect to board comments, speaking of our counsel, I think, Mr. White, there might be an opportunity or a need to go into
Probably a short one.
Okay. All that being said, so for those of you that have not previously joined us, definitely as it relates to those of you that are with the media, we are going to move into executive session. Whenever we move into executive session, we ask that all members of the public to leave the room, and we will attempt to get through the discussions that are necessary during our executive session as promptly as possible. But in the event that you do not decide to stay with us, we'll note that the next meeting of the board will take place on December the 9th, back in our regular location at 3 p.m. in the VOC room at 100 Cherokee.
So we need a vote.
Yes.
Motion.
Motion to move into executive session for the purposes of discussing ongoing and or pending litigation.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Absolutely.
Okay. It's been moved and properly seconded to move into executive session. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. No opposition? Oh. The motion passes unanimously. Sure.
I'm gonna take it.
Sure.